Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we are trying to find 1000 entertaining escapist books. So we review books of every genre, and today we're doing a fantasy. This is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This is the first of a trilogy, which is the Winter Night trilogy. This is a fantasy that feels like a fairy tale. Now, it isn't any fairy tale that we're familiar with. I think the author took some little bits and pieces of fairy tales or overall patterns in fairy tales and created something very unique. Okay, so the plot. Our plot is our main character is she's in Russia. So this is like 13th century Russia, so quite a while ago, very primitive from today's standards. And the world is such that there are little household demons, little spirits, think brownies, one that lives in the stables and keeps the stables good and the horses healthy and that kind of thing, and one that lives in the river and maybe drowns people that get too close. That kind of environment. And so part one of the series really is introducing our main character and her family, the circumstances, her village, the politics, kind of what's going on in the world building. And then part two is she has grown up now. So at the beginning she's like 6 years old, I want to say. And in part two, she's basically become a woman. So she's like 14, which in those days, you get married at age 14. So she's right on the cusp of that. But she is special. She's got magical blood. She can see things that others don't. So these household demons and stuff that help the village, she can see them, but most people can't. There's only one other person, her new stepmother, who can see them. But her stepmother fears them, and she thinks that they are fantastic. They're just part of the world that she lives in, and it's just the way life is. Anyway, part two is mostly her, the new circumstances. There's a lot of things going on, like, maybe she's going to get married, or maybe she's going to go to a convent, or, people come, or the winter gets really harsh, a bunch of things going on. And then part three gets really deeply into the fairy tale part of it, because stepmother wants her gone, and another kind of a village priest wants her gone, and one of the great magical powers in the woods, like the Winter King, doesn't want her gone, wants to protect her to some extent, or use her perhaps. And then there's a great evil in the woods that wants to be free to kill everybody, the kind of thing. And so she is trying to prevent that, or work with, anyway, it's a big, huge magical mess accumulating with, trying to stop this big evil. So that's kind of the summary of the plot. Very vague, but there's a lot going on in the story. This is one of the things I liked about it, is there's constantly something new happening. And it could be something fairly simple, like, somebody in the village dies, or it could be that they're going to take a trip to Moscow, or, her sister gets married, or things like that. But it could also be a lot more magical, like, for example, there is a jewel that the Winter King gives to her father to give to her. And what ends up happening to that? Does he give it to her? No, he doesn't. He gives it to somebody else. And what happens with that? Things like that make for a really interesting story. Very, you kind of are constantly being introduced with new things. The pacing, though, doesn't feel frantic. It feels just like, something new is going to happen, and something unexpected new is going to happen, and then go on and on. You don't feel like this is a plot that you can predict the next step. So I liked that. The plot is fantastic on this. This is something I really liked about this. The heavy atmosphere. So the atmosphere of this book is really interesting. You really feel it. It's not grim and gritty, like some fairy tales. This isn't a dark story. But it feels heavy is the best way I can say. Like cold, deep winter in Russia where there's famine, but there's also hope and firelight in the villages. You really feel it. And the author did a fantastic job on feeling that atmosphere of the story. The tone is great. The world building, I really did like the way all the various magical elements came about and kind of how they interact and stuff. For example, our Winter King, it kind of feels like it should go to a romance, but it doesn't. And it kind of feels like it should go to an adventure quest, but it doesn't. But it's got elements of all of that together. And so I really liked the way that it wraps up that fairy tale feel, but not in a way that's familiar. It feels like it should be familiar, but it isn't. And I really like the way the author did that. Another thing I really like is the historical details. So things like, for example, the getting married at age 14, that was very typical. Some of the things with the interactions with deep politics on who exactly is ruling Russia and why, kind of in the background there. It's not heavily influenced in the story, but it's there, little details. The way life is, like sleeping on top of the oven, that's just the way people did it to survive the winter, things like that. Then I liked the historical details. So this is not a historical fiction, but it's got enough elements there to kind of nudge up against that, and I like that. Our main character is really likable. I really liked her. So she is kind of oblivious a lot to the evil that goes around her. She is not, like, for example, she gets, unfairly switched, for example, by her stepmother, and she doesn't lash out about this, okay? She is stubbornly not gonna cry even though it hurt, but she is not going to retaliate. And I like this about her. She doesn't come across as a bitter, vengeful person, despite a lot of injustice that does happen. And it does not feel oppressive. So she does not end up coming across as somebody who's being crushed all the time by injustice. It's just the occasional unfairness of life kind of feel. And so I like the way she lives her life, kind of more oblivious to that kind of thing. Or a good attitude despite some of that kind of stuff. So that I really like. I also like how the author, despite her circumstances and wanting to be free, it doesn't come across as the hyper-feminist bratty. Like, for example, it's culturally she should get married, and her father picks somebody, and she doesn't really want to get married, but she goes along with it. She submits to her father's choice and doesn't put up a fuss, and this is very culturally and for the time period very appropriate on her part. So the author does not inject that bratty rebellion that a modern woman might do in those circumstances. Now, she doesn't end up getting married, but it's not because of her being rebellious. It's because she just is who she is and her fiance is not interested. So it dissolves the engagement. And that ends up being really good. I really like the way the author handled that. So I like our main character a lot. I like the choices she made. I like her attitude. She's great. I will say, despite this being a series, it doesn't feel like it's part of a series. Like, the author made a standalone book and then ended up doing a sequel. It feels like a complete story. There are certainly ways you can feel like right at the very end where things could go, perhaps, but it doesn't need to. And so it feels like it's nicely wrapped up in a bow. That's great. It's a standalone book. So I like that. Okay, there's a handful, very small number of things that I didn't like about this book. So, one of them is its handling of religion. So, one of the bad guys in this book is an Eastern Orthodox priest. And he comes to the village preaching Christianity, and he is the bad guy. And the way the book handles this is that Christianity is an indifferent, cold, silent God who does nothing for the people, and the little demons that spirits and stuff, those are the ones that protect people. And when the village turns away from the spirits and turns toward Christ, then disaster befalls upon them because their little household spirits are no longer protecting them. So, as a Christian, I found that irritating, okay? The theology message in this book is backwards. It's awful. But it's a fairy tale. That's the way life is sometimes, that fairy tales don't have reality in them, and that's fine. But it was kind of irritating to me. There is some non-consensual groping that is, not great, but nothing goes really beyond a couple very brief touching and a kiss that the girl is not happy about, but then is quickly interrupted and nothing comes of that. But that is there. Finally, the thing I don't like about it is the continual idea that marriage and family, childbearing, is a cage that women must conform to and that they all hate it or something like that. Like it's something that women should break free of and that should be a good thing, which I don't approve of because I'm married and a mom and think it's great, and don't really love the fact that it's kind of portrayed as a strong negative in this book. But overall, I really enjoyed the story. I thought it was fantastic, very well written. I really liked the descriptive words that the author uses. There are some Russian words. There's a glossary in the back. There's like a page and a half of words, mostly names of various spirits, like the kitchen spirit has a different name than the river spirit, that kind of stuff. That, if you want to look it up for specifics, if you don't really remember, as they're unfamiliar words, they're there. That's kind of nice. Overall, I highly recommend it. 2 thumbs up. And for somebody who likes fairy tales, somebody who likes adventures and quests and stuff, this would be a great book. I highly recommend it. So, thank you for watching. I hope you join me next week.